So I woke up from a nap the other day, and somebody asked me a question about what do they think I think. They think, nope, see, I got that wrong already. This is what happens when I try talking right after I wake up. Okay, let me start that over. So I was taking a nap, and then I woke up, and then someone talked to me and said, hey, where do you think we go when we die? And I thought to myself, that's an interesting question. And in that regard, it made me really consider how that even is a question to some people, in the sense that I know some people do not even think that there is anything after we die. And it kind of makes me wonder why someone would think that. Because, if I sit back and I think about it in the grand scheme of things, how complicated is this planet? How complicated are human beings? Sloths, for that matter. For crying out loud, I think human beings have somewhere around 30-something miles of just vasculatory system, like blood vessels. If they were stretched end to end, they go on for a hell of a long time. So if we are this complicated, we are this collection of billions of cells that create a living organism that thinks with one mind, why is it then that death would be so simple? Right? Why is it that life could be so complex, so developed, so difficult to even comprehend or grasp, and then suddenly at the end, it's nothing. Blackness. The abyss. Nothing there at all, just the long eternal sleep. The big last yawn. The snore at the end of the snooze that is life. That doesn't make any sense to me if there's so much out there. And that's not even considering the fact that aliens could exist or do exist, in my little opinion. And life out there is so much more vast and beyond in the universe than where we sit here on this little rock floating through space. And yet this little rock floating through space is so complex and integrated. And it's amazing how it gets down on an atomic level alone. And yet, at the end, there's just nothing? Absolutely nothing? Really? Just blackness. Just the abyss. Just quietness. There's not at all any way that there could be a higher conscious level of being, or that perhaps we are somehow filtered back into the system via a life stream from Final Fantasy VII. It's just nothing? Because that certainly doesn't make any sense to me. It can't just be nothing. There has to be a bigger answer to that puzzle, because life is far too complicated to allow for such simplicity to exist on such an endgame level, if you think about it. We go through all this, we go through all the education, the learning, the knowledge, and then that's it. There's nothing left. There was no point to any of it. I disagree. I don't think that's the case. And this goes into a different conversation where one can talk about their belief system, and religious beliefs can easily come into the mix, and people can believe in different spiritual essences for the beyond. And while I may be a practitioner of one of those myself, that doesn't really change anything at the end of the day. The core of all of this breaks down to the simplicity of, is it really that simple? Does life just end? If there's so much to it right now, does it just end? And on a religious basis, you can argue that on many different principles. On a scientific basis, you can say, of course, life just ends. The consciousness goes away. But that being said, we can't even say that. We don't even know what consciousness actually is, right? That's the one thing Well, okay, one of a couple of different things, but one thing that scientists cannot, like, they all agree upon, we don't really finitely know what consciousness is. We have not been able to figure that out. We've never really fully grasped it. We try to assert it and associate it in different manners, in different forms, but at the end of the day, there is a spot somewhere deep in the center of our brain that generates this thing that we call consciousness, that generates our soul, quote unquote. This is the part of us that we do not know. We cannot define other than to call it a consciousness, other than to call it our third eye, our internal selves. But we know it's there. We know it's what makes each of us individual and each of us unique in every single way that makes us us. But we don't know what it is. We cannot actually put a definition on it and say, yep, this is definitely what it is. This is definitely how it works. We don't know. But we know that there is an inner driving force that pushes every single human being in their own direction, in their own way, that makes them them and no one else. So you're telling me that you know what happens to that thing that we can't explain when our physical form dies. We know all we know about our physical form. We do not know anything about that consciousness form. And you're telling me that's just darkness afterwards? I don't believe it. I don't think that's the case at all. I think that we have no idea. I think we truly have no clue what happens to our consciousness when our physical body dies. And I think that it is quite naive to consider that there is nothing. Because that's pretty audacious to think that we suddenly know what's going to happen to something when we can't even explain what that something is or what it or how it works. But we know how it's going to end. We know what's going to happen when it ends. On what proof? On what evidence? We simply don't know. So nobody technically has the right to say there's nothing at the end. Because technically, we're all lying if we say that. Nobody actually knows. Only the people that have died know. And people have died and come back and said crazy stories about seeing things and this and that. But at the end of the day, we don't actually know. So I think it's within the realm of possibility to keep within a rational head and say, yeah, there very well could be something. And that seems like a very logical position to take, considering that we simply do not know what the consciousness is or how it acts and how it responds in certain situations, including death. It's fairly logical to consider that there might be nothing as well, but it's more logical to consider that we do not know. And because the consciousness is such an unknown variable, given all the other stuff that we know, given how much we're able to find out about ourselves, but the consciousness is the one thing that we cannot fully describe or define and we just don't know, it's fairly certain to say that there's probably something afterwards. It would be more unlikely that there isn't, considering the complex nature given the consciousness is, because we can't figure it out. If it's that complex, why would it end that simply? Case in point. So I think that there is something afterwards. Don't really know what. Not really sure what. I'm sure there's a lot of religions out there that kind of make you think and make you wonder, but I think there is. And I think there is based on purely a logical definition of the fact that we simply don't know what makes us us. And if we don't know what makes us us, how do we know what happens to that when it dies?
See you around.